Hi, friends. Welcome to another episode of The Morning Cup. I'm your host, Emma Schmid, and today I'm joined with guest Daniela Spear. I won't go too much into what she does because she does a really great job of explaining it, but a little background on Daniela and I. We've known each other since 2020. We were coworkers. We worked at Lenovo. We were both Exos coaches working in the Lenovo space. And I've just really always looked up to her. She was a great role model for me being new into Exos. And, you know, I just adore this person. So I'm so excited to finally have her on the show. This was such a good episode. I feel like I say that about every episode, but I had such a great time learning about her autoimmune journey, how she's learned to heal herself, and not only that, but others. So this was such a great, informative, educational episode, and I hope you all enjoy. And I think you were the only female on the team at the time. And so I just really, really looked, yeah, good times. But I just remember really looking at things that stood out to me about Daniela is I always looked up to you and you just like got it together. You always just were so professional and just good at everything you did. So, and
thank
also
you.
just like sidebar, and then you can talk about yourself. Like, I think everybody needs a Daniela in their life because I'm just here to gas up my guests, honestly.
Oh, thanks. This is
But
great. I love being on your show.
but literally just like you always know what to say. You have such wisdom. Um, just like whenever I was going through something, you always had the right thing to say. And I just really appreciate it. But
Oh,
yeah.
thank you. Funny, someone made a comment about that at a movement conference I was at last weekend in San Diego. They were like, "You were just so wise, but you look so young. Like, how old are you?" And I was like, "What?"
You're wise beyond your years.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, when we met, I was at the time the only female on our team. And I appreciate that it looked like I had it all together because I was more just, trying to stand my ground. You know how it is being a female in the fitness industry. You kind of got to hold your ground with the boys.
Oh, yeah. I'm kind of like, I found myself in a similar situation after you had moved on to different opportunities. I think you started working full time with your business. And
I
then
did.
I was
Yeah.
the only girl. And it definitely makes you tough. Like you got to be a little bit more ahead, I feel like, which is not a bad thing. I think it benefits us in the end. But
Yeah. Well, I don't
yeah.
know if our conversation was going to be about like the difference between like men and women, but like I think like just working on a team of all men, like you learn to be more direct, like that like nourishing side, or not nourishing, but like nurturing side of you. Kind of like you have to like cut that off for a bit. You just got to go like straight to the point. Like I remember I would like write out my emails like how I would normally say things, and then I would like go back and edit it and like take out like the please and thank yous, and it would just be like do this.
Take away the exclamation marks and like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's so hard. I think I still struggle. I think I'm getting better, but yeah, that's really funny. Um, do you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself? Like what are you doing now?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm Daniela. I also go by Coach Dani. A lot of my clients know me as Coach Dani, and I am a restorative movement practitioner and strength and conditioning specialist. So I help individuals with autoimmune diseases implement strength training, movement, and recovery practices into their healthcare practice to help them heal from autoimmune disease. One of my biggest shifts in um, I guess, training and just health philosophy is that the body is able to heal itself. And that is something that is a huge change that helped me heal autoimmune disease in my own life. And it is awesome that I now get to share that with my clients and help them see that their body is capable of healing when given the right environment. And the avenue that I get them to teach them that is through movement, which has always been a huge passion of mine. I was an athlete in high school, I was just very active through college, and during my college years is when I really discovered that, like, hey, exercise can actually really help me manage my autoimmune symptoms. But of course, at the time, being someone in my early 20s, I didn't know like a whole lot about like the right approach to exercise, the right approach to strength training. And so I have like refined that a lot through the years in just my own continued education and in my experiences at work and working with clients. And I now have a much better system and approach for myself and for my clients. And that is what I do full time through my business called Remade Wellness, which is all about giving people a second chance at having a better relationship with their body and just, again, seeing that they can heal, that their body is capable of healing when given the right environment. And so I help my clients create that environment for themselves.
That was beautiful. I think also, which I also love, is the fact that you have done all this on yourself first, which I think is like you live what you teach, which is so important as a coach. Because
Yeah.
like, especially because you can empathize with the people who are struggling right now because you've gone through that.
Absolutely. It was so interesting back when I first started working at Exos. With Exos, like a lot of our training philosophy is based on um, what do you call it? Like, I guess strategies for professional athletes, right? Like that is the background
Mm-hmm.
of Exos. But we take those approaches that are used with professional athletes and we implement that to the general population um, within corporate fitness. And I remember I was like learning all this and I was like, okay, so what we use for athletes, we can use for like the general population. And I started implementing those concepts in my own life, in my own strength training practices. And I was like, I'm starting to feel better. I was like, is it possible that the approaches used for athletes can like translate over to individuals living with autoimmune disease? And it was like, I literally felt like I had made this like ingenious discovery at the time because like no one else was talking about strength training or movement for autoimmune disease. Like at the time, it was just
Mm-hmm.
the conversation was like, well, you have autoimmune disease. You deal with it, you work around it, you try not to like upset your disease or, that was the conversation at the time. But I had this idea that, like, okay, these strategies that we're using for improving human performance, right? We're helping these athletes be like mega human. And you
Mm-hmm.
have a population of people whose humanness is declining just by the very nature of autoimmune disease itself, especially with autoimmune diseases that target connective tissue, right? People start to lose the ability to function in their day to day activities. And so I
Mm-hmm.
thought, well, we're helping these athletes be more human. Can I help individuals with autoimmune disease be more human? And that was like this
Right.
concept that I like ran with, right? As we started applying it to myself, I was feeling better. And I started just like kind of sharing this stuff with like some of my clients that I was working with at the time. And they were starting to get good results. They were starting to feel better. And it was just like, it wasn't like just feeling better. It was like tangible evidence, like, hey, I just got back from my doctor's appointments. Like my labs have improved so much. And like the only thing that's really changed for them was adding in a strength training approach that combined both movement and recovery. And it was just a smarter way to approach working out, right?
Right.
Because like people's doctors tell them like, hey, you should exercise, you should work out. But for someone with autoimmune disease, like that can look very different. And a lot of times people just don't know where to start. And
Mm-hmm.
I I felt like at the time I was like, no one else was talking about this. Like it was kind of like a weird feeling because like I was like, am I crazy? Like if I talk about this, like what, like what are people going to say? Like, right. You always have that like little bit of doubt that like, did I just get lucky? Like, did this just work for me? Did maybe this just work for like one or two clients? Like, or do we really have something here? And like over time,
Mm-hmm.
it's been proven time and time again, like we got something here. Like strength training helps reverse autoimmune disease. Movement
Right.
reverses autoimmune disease. Recovery reverses autoimmune disease. And like the narrative is no longer, I have autoimmune disease, I can't do anything about it. It's, I have an autoimmune disease. Let me learn how to put my body in the right environment so that it can heal itself. And that's wild, right? Isn't that so cool?
Wow. That is incredible. I think also what's incredible too is that the barrier to entry is already high enough for people without autoimmune disease. So I just think it's that much more special that you do this because the narrative they've always been told, the people who have autoimmune disease, is like, you can't do this. Like there's this
Right.
hard can't.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait a second, you can. And you show them that you
Yeah.
can through what you've done with yourself. And that just speaks
Yeah.
volumes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's so
And it is like
powerful.
an uphill battle sometimes because within the autoimmune community, within the autoimmune population, people don't trust anyone but their doctors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And understandable, right? Like they don't even trust themselves sometimes because like unless you've experienced autoimmune disease, like it's hard to like understand that feeling of like I don't really trust my body, right? And that makes sense because when you're told like hey, your body's attacking itself, your body's confused, you can't control this, it's going to do whatever, like how can you trust your body? Like with those kind of messages, how can you? And so people
Mm-hmm.
sort of like outsource their trust, they outsource their self-trust to their doctors. And then you have doctors who are saying, don't lift anything heavier than 5 pounds, only do cardio, maybe some yoga. Of course, people's function is declining. Like, what do you
Yeah.
think is going to happen? Like, just
Right.
outside of even like autoimmune disease, like, you take that approach for anyone else, like, of course, like, human function is going to decline.
We're not meant
And
to live that way too.
yeah, all and that's why I'm just like on this mission of like telling people like, hey, there is an approach that can help you at the minimum. Like, right, because sometimes people like just cannot make that jump to healing and reversing, but at the minimum, it can like slow the progress of autoimmune
Absolutely.
disease. Um, and so it can be an uphill battle of like telling people like, hey, actually, you should lift heavy when their doctor is like, don't pick up anything heavier than 5 pounds and only do cardio. It's like, it's hard to fight against like what their doctor said. Um,
Right.
but I think like for myself as a coach, like I've had to take on a different mentality of like, okay, I am not fighting with people's doctors. I'm actually advocating for you. I am here to
Right.
advocate for your life, for your body, for your humanness. I'm here to advocate for you and your life and the life that you want, which is why like the theme and the messaging behind my business is a remade life, is like taking your life using strength training, using movement, using that mind body connection, breath work, nervous system work, things that just are all related to connecting in with your body. You can use those tools and they're all accessible to you because if you have a body, you have the tools and you can reverse autoimmune disease and create a new life. And
Right.
you heard it here first, people. It's possible to heal.
Say it right into the mic.
Louder for the people in the back.
Yes.
You can
Turn
heal.
that
And
dial up.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, for any of your audience, if you if you have an autoimmune disease or you know someone, because I think we all know someone, right, that
Mm-hmm.
experiences autoimmunity in whatever capacity. Um, a lot of different ways that autoimmunity shows up and manifests in the body. But if you're listening to this, like, I just want you to know that it is possible. It is possible to take back control of your body and to trust it again and to have a life that uh, you feel in control of, like not one that is directed or dictated by autoimmune disease and not directed by fear of when am I going to have another flare up, but one
Mm-hmm.
where you're confident, even if you do have a flare up, because I think, like, healing autoimmune disease doesn't necessarily mean like you'll never have symptoms again. And I think that that is also a hard concept for people to understand that. Um, does that mean like I'll never experience these things? Like, no, because in the healing process, like, you learn that those symptoms are simply just messengers from your body. And like, you want those, like, you want your body to
Right.
tell you, like, when are you leaning too far in one direction, right? Bring it in, bring it back in. And so it's like,
Right.
you learn to like interact and understand with your symptoms better. And even when you do experience symptoms, then like, it's not this mystery of like, I just woke up like this. I don't know how this happened. Actually, you can actually track back and say, okay, this happened this last week. What else has been going on? Um, am I dehydrated? How has my nutrition intake been? How's my sleep been? Like, all these factors, you start to realize like, oh, all of these things contribute to autoimmune flare-ups. I can control the controllables,
Right. It's like
and you feel like you're
reframing.
back. Yeah, you're
It's like
back in the driver's
reframing of
seat.
like, yeah, but what you can control. And I think that is true for anything in life, but specifically those who struggle with autoimmune disease. But like if you're injured, for example, it's really easy to get into the victim mentality of, I can't do this, but there's literally always something you can do. And that's something
Yeah.
I've always talked about because I had my fair share of chronic pain and I didn't know what was wrong with me for a very long time. Like I was like, do I have fibromyalgia? I don't know what, but
Mhm.
I was just going through all this pain for a long time and it was very frustrating. Like similar to the feelings I'm sure you've experienced, but on a much higher, like longer period of time. But it's scary when you don't know why your body's reacting in a certain way. And it's easy to find comfort in playing the victim, being like,
Yeah.
well, like this was taken away from me. I can't do that, so I'm not going to try. And it
Yeah.
kind of gives you an excuse. I don't want to say excuse, but it makes you feel better about not like going above and beyond your limitations that you have.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that very much relates to the conversation of blame versus responsibility. And autoimmune disease or not, chronic injury, chronic pain or not, like, no matter like who you are, like, no one likes to be blamed, right? Like, it it doesn't ever feel good to be like, this is my fault, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is why we as humans want to look for the outside thing to point to and say, oh, like, this is the cause of my back pain, this is the cause of my autoimmunity, it's just genetics is what it is. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, genetics plays a role in everything, but in reality, not as much as we would like to give it credit for, right? And it's hard. It's hard to um, feel like you are at fault for causing things, but you have to like flip that script. And it's not about
Mm-hmm.
blame or whose fault it is or who caused it or what happened to you. Like, that's very like past focus. What we can do is focus on the future and take responsibility. So it is no longer a conversation about like whose fault it is or like what caused it. It's like, how do I change this, right? How can I
Mm-hmm.
take responsibility for now and shift that moving forward, like shift the direction moving forward for my chronic pain or my chronic inflammation, my chronic fatigue, whatever chronic thing you're dealing with, you have to shift out of that like blaming narrative and shift to the empowerment narrative of I'm going to take responsibility for what's ahead.
Right. I also think to go along with that, I know for my situation, there's so many different programs that are like, oh, this is going to cure your pain. Like, follow
Mm-hmm.
this 8-week program and you're like going to get out of pain. And so I fell victim to that a few times and
Mm-hmm.
I would like purchase these programs. And I think the intention is well, like it's a good
Yep.
intention, but when it doesn't work for you, you just get that much more discouraged, and you're like, well, I'm searching for answers and I can't find them. But I guess it kind of comes back to what you were saying of kind of more looking inward and just tracking what you're doing. Like,
Yeah.
I think stress, accumulation of like work, living environments, um, working out, what you're eating, how you
Yeah.
talk to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, maybe a question for you? One, did you start to like, how did you kind of take control when you started, when you were noticing flare ups and stuff? Um, we'll start there. How did you kind of start to take control and like notice trends for yourself?
Yeah. So one of the first times I realized that I had control over what I experienced was actually not related to autoimmunity in a sense, but kind of, I'll tie it back. Or it wasn't really even related to like fitness or strength training, but I was taking a financial education class and I like tried to avoid creating a budget as much as possible. I hated looking at money. I hated looking and like just like confronting my finances. I mean, I was in my early 20s and
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't have really good financial practices. Like, let's just be honest, I just was not good at managing money. And I was taking a financial class, and then like I realized, like, oh, I am the reason why I don't have money, right? Like it was just like I was always
Mm-hmm.
really stressed about money, but I would always just like spend it on like random things and then be upset that I didn't have enough money. And like through that financial class, I was like, oh, like I can control this, right? Like I just have to be willing to like sit with that like uncomfortable feeling of making changes, of like just like looking in the
Right.
mirror, right, so to speak. And so after that is when I decided to try the autoimmune paleo protocol. It is like a variation of just the paleo diet. I'm not one to push like certain approaches, but for anyone with autoimmune disease, like if you're curious about it, look into it. It was really helpful for me. It was like a really great starting point in not necessarily like following this protocol and like healing my gut, but just like assessing my relationship with food, like assessing my relationship with preparation and learning to just feel into my body of like
Mm.
these changes that were happening, right? And then I think after that is like when I really started making a lot more changes in my approach to strength training. So like I was initially making all of these like external changes, what I would consider external changes. And they're great and they work and 100% recommend. However, they only get you so far. They only get you so far in the conversation of true healing, because what really heals, what really changed the game for me was the internal work. And
Mm.
honestly, I hate using that term because I feel like it has become a bit of a buzzword on social media. Like, are you doing the work? But I just taking like a step back from that, like researching and learning and reading about like the science behind the mind body connection, the psychosomatic connection, and getting a better understanding of how the brain functions and how the brain works, just what like completely changed it for me, because I realized that the physical symptoms that were showing up as autoimmune disease and what was labeled as lupus were just physical manifestations of
Mm.
emotional wounds that I had experienced but had not dealt with. Probably because, when I initially experienced those emotional wounds, like I didn't have the skill set to deal with it then. And I think I was just too young, and my caretakers did not provide like resources on like dealing with my emotions. And as a kid, you learn to suppress that, so that because you just learn to put it away because other people don't want to deal with your emotions when
Mhm.
you're a kid, or like you feel like you don't have the space or the freedom to cry. And then as an adult, we like take on those strategies as well. And then like, what do you become? Like there's this population of like people pleasers who are like afraid to like offend, like inconvenience people, and you develop strategies of perfectionism. And like these are all methods of just trying to survive. Like none of those are bad, none of those are wrong. And you start to realize that this entire time your brain is just doing its job. It's just doing its job of protecting you and helping you
Mhm.
survive in an environment that is like just speaks autoimmunity like all around you. Like and
Right.
it you start to make that connection between like the physical and the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, and it starts to make sense of like, okay, I've done all this like physical work and that's helped me and it's gotten me so far. But like, here's the game changer of like dealing with my emotional wounds that have created certain behavioral patterns that have created and continue to manifest autoimmunity in my body. Do I want
Wow.
to change that? Am I willing? Right. So it's just kind of like that same feeling of going back to that financial class that I was taking, like getting uncomfortable with confronting a budget, like getting uncomfortable with like the reality of like my financial health is just looking at the numbers, right?
Mhm.
And
That's
now
scary.
it's getting,
It's
yeah,
scary for
it's,
so many.
yeah. Oh, that's what I was going to say. I was going to relate that back to autoimmunity because like I, for a long time, like lived under the narrative that like, oh, I'll never be able to do what I want or have the life that I want because I just have so many medical bills, right? And I
Oh,
like
yeah.
could never pay off medical bills because I never had enough money. And that was just always like the mind drama. But bringing it back to now, it's am I willing to sit with the uncomfortableness of the emotions that I experience and the behaviors that those emotions create in my life as an adult? Like, am I willing to confront them? And
Ooh.
that is hard. Like, that is very hard. And I know, like, you and I have had conversations around, like, okay, I'm experiencing this certain pain. And, like, I'll ask you questions like, okay, aside from like your nutrition, hydration, sleep, movement, what are you feeling? What are you holding on to? What are you carrying around right now? Like, what is coming up? And
Mhm.
that is if that is like the one thing I can teach my clients is to learn to be comfortable checking in with their body and like talking to their body, like getting out of their head and like getting into their body about what they feel. Like
Yeah.
people won't need me anymore and that's going to be great.
It's like this positive, like this what's the effect like when it bleeds into other people and they help other people type
Like
of thing.
diffusion, is that
Diffusion,
or is that like
maybe.
osmosis? I don't know, I forget the difference, but yeah, it kind of trickles
One
down.
of those. The trickle
Let me
down
check my
effect,
science book.
maybe.
The what?
The trickle down effect, I don't
The
know.
trickle down effect, we'll
Um,
call it that.
yeah, but you just said so many great things that I want to touch on.
Yeah.
Number 1, number one, I was like trying to keep like mental tallies. I'm like, okay, I want to talk about this, like keeping notes
Yeah,
here.
sorry. Sometimes I go off like I mean, this is like what I'm so passionate about talking about because like once I get started, I'm like, everyone needs to hear about this. Like you need to know.
No, please, literally don't stop. But what I really liked what you said, with everything, but the labeling
Mhm.
aspect of autoimmune disease, chronic pain. Again, going back to comfort, I think people find, and myself included, I like was
Mhm.
searching for a name for whatever I was going through. And so I think just
Yeah.
being able to label something like Band-Aid slap, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So
I think
I
in a
and
sense
yeah.
it helps. It can help. The So here's like I think if anyone has been connected with me on social media kind of prior to 2022, 2023, I would talk about lupus all the time because that's what I had, right? I have lupus. That is and that's with any autoimmune disease or any chronic illness. Like you hear the I have insert the disease name.
Mm-hmm.
And in part, like it is helpful because it kind of gives you this sense of relief of like, I'm not making this shit up. Sorry, am I allowed
Yeah.
to use
Yes, please.
Okay.
I dropped the F bomb the other day.
Okay.
Like it's encouraged and welcomed.
Yeah, I mean, 'cause when you are going through a diagnosis process with autoimmunity, or just even trying to figure out what's going on, it can take years. It can take years for a doctor to give you like a clear answer, and so I think that's why people chase the disease name, like they want something
Mm-hmm.
because they're like, oh, that's gonna explain what I've got going on, and I'm not speaking for anyone else's experience, but I will share mine. So for me, lupus manifested in chronic joint pain and inflammation. I had skin rashes, chronic fatigue, and then I also, when I was first diagnosed, I had stage 4 kidney failure. So that is how,
What?
yeah, that is how it manifested for me. And I was 16 at the time. And yeah, and I think it also just depends on like what age you are, because like try telling 16-year-old Daniela that she has emotional wounds that's causing her autoimmune disease. I've been like, what? No, like I just can't pick up my pencil at school. Like I just want to, like I just
Mm.
want to be normal. I want to go to prom. Just trying to go to prom, like in high school. But
Yeah.
um, with labels, like it does give you a sense of relief. Like I said, that you're not making all this up, but at the end of the day, the label is all that it is. It is just a label to describe what is going on in your body.
Mm-hmm.
So, was there something inside of me that was like causing lupus? No. Was there something happening that was creating symptoms? Yes. Did those symptoms get labeled as lupus? Yes. And I know that that is like a very vague concept. But what I mean is like when you get a cold, right? There is
Mm-hmm.
a virus causing that cold, right? I have a cold.
Mm-hmm.
With autoimmunity, with the exception, I mean, I think, yeah, Lyme disease gets kind of thrown into the bucket of autoimmunity. That is caused by a virus carried by ticks, but that's a different conversation. But in
Mm-hmm.
general, majority autoimmune disease is not caused by like something entering your body and then like creating this disease. It is your own body responding to both the internal and the external environment. And that is what makes autoimmunity so different, is that there's not like this thing inside of you causing the disease, but it is your own body responding to the environment. And
Mm,
that is very hard for people to understand, because it's a lot easier to be like, oh, well, I have lupus and that's why I have joint pain and I have inflammation. Actually, like, you might have joint pain and inflammation because your lifestyle is not very active and your lymphatic system is clogged and is just bogged down by toxins. You're dehydrated, so your body's having a hard time eliminating toxins. You're overworked, you're overstimulated, so your nervous system is just like on fight or flight all the time. You don't actually rest.
right.
Your body doesn't feel safe. And these are all lifestyle factors and environmental factors, right? And like you said, but it's just easier to have that label. And I get it. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
against labels here, right? It does help to have a label, but you have to be careful of how you take on that label, because for a long time I did very much identify as a lupus warrior or a lupus thriver, and like lupus was like my entire identity. And like, no wonder like I kept having flare-ups, because like everything about my life was about lupus. But when everything about my
Mm-hmm.
life became about healing, is it changes the game. It's a different shift, it's a different approach.
I mean, this just like gives me goosebumps to even think about like now, like you went through all that and now today, aren't you medication free?
I am, yeah. Let's
That
see.
is
I think
so awesome.
next month I'll be officially 9 months medication free. And it has been an incredible journey, incredible experience, quite a bit of a roller coaster at times. But yeah, I got approved to get off medication last year after being on it for 15 years. So, like, it is never
Wow.
too late. It's never too late to start that journey to uh, making changes, because it is possible. And like for me, I think like people kind of like in the health and wellness industry, people kind of like live on like two ends of the spectrum of like, science and evidence based and medication, and then you have like the like holistic and all natural and like um organic, whatever, like get into your
Yes,
feelings and like
yes.
the
Everything is
manifest.
black and white in
Right,
fitness.
and it's
Yes.
like the two ends of the spectrum, but like for me, like I really believe that medication has its time and its place, and it can be really helpful to help you get to a place where you have the headspace to make changes. Because like I
Mm-hmm.
get it, when you're dealing with like all these symptoms and you feel like total trash, like don't nobody want to get up and make their like hydration drink and like do their lymphatic movements and hip mobility. Nobody wants to do that when they feel like trash, right? So I get it,
Right.
and if medication like helps you get to a place to start making those changes, like awesome, do that. Make the changes to where you no longer need medication and start the process of coming off of it. Like, it doesn't have to be one extreme or the other. You don't have to be like total science, evidence based scientific research, or like the wellness, crunchy, organic people manifesting
Crunchy
healing
granola.
over here. Like it feels scary, and it just feels like two different worlds. But like you can find a happy medium like anywhere along that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like taking everything with a grain of salt as well, like not diving headfirst. I mean, I don't know, you can dive headfirst into a concept, but then you're
Hmm.
kind of ignorant of like other things around you. And this is
Yeah.
really for like anything. This is like for anything in life. I feel like you can apply this to anything.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely. It's
yeah.
also kind of like the perfectionism mentality and the like all or nothing mentality. Like, right, we have the clients, the exercisers who are like in that all or nothing, like I have to do it 100% all the time or it doesn't count, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I've actually learned a really important lesson in my sourdough bread baking journey that has been very, very short. Still
I
trying
love
though,
this for
but
you.
I know, like,
It's
bet you didn't
rough.
think that was coming, right? Like sourdough bread, what does that have to do with healing autoimmunity? But let me tell you, okay, this is how my process started. I asked my husband to find me a sourdough starter. And so, being just the angel he is, went and found me not one, but two starters. And after I got the starters, that's when I started doing research on how to bake sourdough bread. And if you are familiar with the sourdough baking process, like that was not the right thing to do. Do not first get your starter and then try to figure it out. Like, figure it out first and then get your starter, because like now I had these two starters that I had to feed, and I was like, oh my god, what do I do? And I didn't even have like a Dutch oven, I didn't have the right flour, and I was like, I don't have the time for this. And I kind of just, it was like I said yes to the process before knowing the process. And I think that
Right,
that's what
right.
kind of you have to take on with like healing, is like you got to say yes before you know what's going to come up in the process, because you don't really know. But also, when I started making sourdough bread, I was like, whatever, screw the instructions. I'm going to try to make this with like, oh, gluten-free flour and like, but my first loaf, it wasn't huge and it wasn't like the, softest like loaf of bread. It was quite dense, but it was still an edible piece of bread. And my point in saying that is like, even if you don't follow things 100% and you kind of do it, you like move yourself in the direction of doing it, you just like 1% towards the direction of doing it, you're gonna get results. Like, and you're gonna create changes in your life, even if it's not the entire thing. Like, you don't, like, yes, like dive in, of course, but also you can slowly step into things. And even if you do dive into the deep end and then try to figure your way out and you don't get it 100% right, like, you're going to learn things in the process. And that's the thing too with like trying to follow other people's processes. Like, I mean, aside from sourdough bread, like, definitely follow the instructions if you want a
Sometimes
good
you,
loaf.
yeah,
Like,
sometimes.
sometimes you gotta, but that's the point. It's like, even if you don't follow the instructions, you get somewhere close. And then when you do follow the instructions, oh my gosh, like it's like 10 times better, right? But it's like you already know the process when you're like following the instructions. So, like, I'm not saying don't follow the instructions. I'm just saying, even if you don't, like, you will still be moving in the right direction. So if like you're just worried about like the amount of effort it takes to create change, like even just getting started with an exercise program, it doesn't have to be 5 days a week. It can be one, it can be two. Just start somewhere. Like, start in the direction of moving towards that 5-day program. And or whatever, like start in the direction of your healing journey, start in the direction of making sourdough bread, start in the direction of writing your book, start in the direction of painting your house, like whatever it is that's going to make any kind of change that you desire for your life, like move in that direction, even if it's not 100%, like 1%, make it happen right now.
I just can't believe you managed to make a wise analogy with sourdough bread. Like
Absolutely.
that's just like top level. But I love that so much. I think, well,
Yeah.
sidebar, for me, I hate following directions. Like my boyfriend
Mhm.
makes fun of me all the time because I never, and so I don't bake. Um, so, take that for what it is. But I really love how you said, even if you don't follow directions, you're still heading in the right direction. And
Yeah.
sometimes just starting, like we've talked about, to summarize, is the hardest part. So even if
Mhm.
you're not doing it 100% correct, because none of us, like you and I, when we first started in fitness, I'm sure you didn't do everything correct. I know I made a lot of mistakes, but here I am, here you are, where we are now, and it's because we started. So a saying
Absolutely.
goes, like, career health, whatever it is, and this is also another thing, like you put yourself out there daily, like first of all, like you're trying new things right now,
Mhm.
but like you have a podcast, you have an Instagram, you've been putting out content for a long time. People who Most people don't put out content. Like there's a lot of people who like to judge and say things, but they've never been the one to put something out, like put themselves out there. So for anyone who is scared to start anything, I hope you get away from take away from this episode. Simply starting and doing anything is better than most.
Absolutely. And like, let me also just like make you feel better right here, right now, for anyone that is like hesitant, because it's like, if you're the person that's like trying to figure everything out before you start, like, I want to make you feel better and say, just start, because trying to trying to figure out all the answers before you start, you have to ask yourself, whose answers am I trying to find? Because if you're like caught up in doing research and, figuring out what so and so is doing or what worked for like so and so, like, that's not your path. That's You were
Right.
trying to get home like using somebody else's directions. And that is the beautiful thing about starting and giving yourself time and grace, is that you figure out you. You figure out yourself. You figure out the nuances of the things that do work for you. And it's not going to be perfect. There's going to be trial and error, but that is like the beautiful part of that, is that you figure out exactly what works for you, but that only comes along the way of doing it, along the way of figuring it out. You discover yourself, you discover what you like. And sometimes I think that that is like really the thing that like keeps people from starting, is that I think people are scared of what they'll find, because like
Ooh.
change change like is very confrontational, right? Because when you start to make changes in your life, right, you commit to an exercise program, what starts happening? Everything in your life is going to like turns to chaos, and like every like barrier, obstacle is going to come up to give you a reason to say no. Because like the scariest thing to your brain is the unknown, and your brain doesn't know what's going to happen by starting this exercise program. And so your brain feels like, whoa, like, hold up, Daniela, like, I don't know about this exercise program. Like, I've never done that before. So I don't feel good about it. So here's 500 things that are going to come up. Like, it's just like
Right. Like possible
we,
outcomes.
yeah, we attract all the things that like prevent us from continuing to say yes to our commitment. And that is actually very confrontational to ourselves, because now we are confronted with, am I going to give up? Am I going to quit? Or I'm going to choose to make this work and keep going, right? Like, it's those behaviors we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the thing that keeps people from starting is like discovering what they're going to find about themselves. But,
Right.
you know, I talked about earlier about getting uncomfortable, like learning to be comfortable with the like uncomfortableness of change, the uncomfortableness of looking in the mirror. If you can figure that out, if you can get comfortable with being with yourself, there's nothing that's going to stop you. Nothing that's going to stop you. So once you start, learn to get comfortable with being with yourself, having those conversations with yourself, not judging yourself for when mistakes happen, not judging yourself for how you feel or the thoughts that you have, but learning to just be with yourself. Like, that is what creates longevity. Like, that, those are the people that keep going, the people that get comfortable being with themselves.
That's beautiful. It's
Yeah.
scary to be with yourself, honestly, if you don't like yourself. too.
Ugh,
Like, what if you don't like yourself right now?
that's another
Or
podcast episode,
I
Emma.
know we won't get there. We won't go there. I'll have to bring you back.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because this is so good. But there's one more thing I kind of wanted to add on to everything you said, which I just absolutely loved. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently of trying new things, is that idea of failing and how you
Mhm.
try something and it doesn't work. That's not really failing. That's you and your, I just saw this on Instagram. It's like, I'm in my trying season.
Yeah,
I think that's beautiful. Just because you've tried something and it didn't work does not mean you failed. And if anything, you failed forward, because now you're
yeah,
saying, this didn't work, but I'm going to try this next thing until I see what works for me. So, just yeah,
absolutely.
my
I
little
love
my
that,
little
my trying
piece.
season.
I'm
Because that
so in
is,
that right
like,
now.
that is very much the, I guess maybe like the theme around healing autoimmune disease. Like not a trying season, like it's, it's trying and difficult, but like you're trying things, like
Mhm.
go you, like you are trying things. And I have a client of mine that I love her so much because she um a lot of times she like shows up and she like changes what the plan was for that day because she's like, I need this, right? And
Mhm.
it's completely different than what I had planned for that day, and it's totally fine. And
Yeah.
she's always like so apologetic about it because she's like, I'm sorry, I know I'm changing the plan. I'm like, hold up, like let's look at what's happening here. You are asking for what you need. You are voicing your needs. You are literally just the act of showing up for yourself. Like that speaks volumes, and that builds so much trust with yourself. That is what builds confidence. Just the
Mhm.
ability to show up, right? Confidence doesn't come from getting it right. Confidence comes
Right.
from showing up, and failure is going to happen in the process. If failure doesn't happen, you're you're not really like testing your limits there, right? Rather that's in like, sports performance, athletic performance, or healing autoimmune disease. It's the same concept. If you don't like meet a little failure along the way, are you really like testing the capacity of your body
Right. I love
to
that.
experience what it is capable of experiencing? And like it's just showing up, showing up is the process. And if you like fail, like guess what, you failed because you did show up, and your body's gonna trust you, your brain is gonna trust you. But if you like are so scared
Right.
because you don't want to mess up, like that creates um what's the word, is
Like a
disconnection, is
barrier.
that a word? Yeah, it kind
Just yeah. That's a word.
of
You want
right.
me to get on the Google real quick?
Yeah. Sorry. Sometimes my like words leave me. But yeah, like when you're so just like caught up and like I don't want to try because I might fail, like you create a disconnection with like your mind body connection. But when you show up and even if you fail, like that builds trust, and that builds knowledge, that builds awareness, and that builds just a relationship with yourself. And I think that is cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is
Okay. So
cool.
we're going to make failing cool.
Failing is in for
Failing is
2024.
in
10 out of 10
2024.
recommend. Well, um, I don't want to take up your whole day. I could talk for you for hours,
Yeah, I
honestly.
feel like we could talk forever. I think we definitely need like an
Part
Emma and
two.
Danny part two
Yeah,
with
don't worry, y'all. She's coming back. Don't worry.
this is great.
Um,
You female
I
coaching,
know.
living the dream. Like, come on, this is might have to do like a whole
I'm
separate podcast.
I think we should do one about talking about like women in strength and conditioning. We got to do one. I can't remember what the other one's about now, but I'm all about women empowerment, especially like recently. I'm just like strong queen season. I'm just so here for it.
I mean, it's Women's
So well,
History Month, so great timing.
I know. Well, before we end this really great time, I wanted to ask you if you could give yourself one piece of advice. So, younger Daniela, what would you give her? What piece of advice?
I would, without a doubt, tell her that her body is her best friend. I think
That's
if I
beautiful.
knew, I think if 16-year-old Daniela like knew that my body was not betraying me, but it was asking for help, I think that like that would have changed the course of like I mean literally half my life. And I get so emotional about like talking about this because um we didn't have like the resources that I have now. Like my family didn't have the knowledge. I think my doctors didn't have. I mean, right, this was like 15, 16 years ago. Like medicine has changed so much
Mm-hmm.
in the last decade and a half, almost 2 decades. Um so it does like make me emotional. Just like sometimes I just wish like I had that knowledge and how like maybe different my life would have turned out. But I think, of course things happen as they're supposed to, and I learned the lessons along the way that I was supposed to so that I can help the people that I'm helping now. But I think that um having had a better relationship with myself along the way, I think would have just made a huge difference. But I do tell 16-year-old Daniela that a lot, that your body is your best friend. And I tell her that every time that I tell current me that. And it's a reminder I give to myself almost daily. And it's like a practice in trusting my body, trusting that my body has innate wisdom, that it knows what it's doing, it's not confused. It does love me because it's my best friend. So that's
That
what I
makes
would
me want to
tell.
cry. Oh my
I know,
gosh.
yeah, it's emotional. Like, autoimmunity can be very emotional. And like I said, sometimes I think back to like, gosh, like, I didn't have to go through like all the things that I went through if I would have just had like the knowledge I have now. But like, I mean, and I say that with like a grain of salt, right? Like, is that the phrase? You take it with a grain of
Yeah.
salt. Like,
Yeah,
I
that's
say
right.
that lightly because, like, in a sense, I did have to go through all of that because that's my life story. That is my life's journey to get me to here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it can be very emotional. Like I say, I try not to focus on like, oh, all that could have been. But it's like, wow, I have this now. And like now, like I do get to change the rest of my life forever
Right.
because I do have this knowledge, and I do trust that my body is my best friend.
I think that's so beautiful, and that I just can't wait for other people to hear this because it's so applicable in anything you're going through in life. You could be suffering from autoimmune disease, you could have chronic pain, you can not like yourself. And the sad truth is that happens to a lot of people, but they live their whole life that way. So the fact that you're able to change it, like as young as you are, because you're still very young, that's that's like incredible. Now you get to do that for other, like pay it forward for other people. That was what I was trying to say earlier.
Oh
Pay it
yeah, the
forward.
trickle effect. Pay it forward. The
Ooh, I'm glad I
osmosis.
got that. Diffusion.
The osmosis. It's actually pay it forward, people.
Yeah, sorry. That's what I've been meaning to say for this whole hour almost. Um, but I just really wanted to thank you for being here, Daniela. You're just like a ray of sunshine.
Oh, Emma,
And
thank you so
I
much
miss,
for letting me be on your platform, allowing me to speak to your audience. I know that your podcast has just been something that's meant so much to you for a very long time. So it is very much an honor to be here, and I appreciate you allowing me the opportunity to speak and to share my story.
of course. Well, I mean, you're coming back for part two.
Of course,
So
yeah,
that's
for sure.
good. It might become a Chronicle series. Like maybe it'll be three and four
Good.
at
I
some point.
mean,
I would love that. Um, where can the people find you? Shout out like everything that you're on
Oh,
for us,
yeah.
please.
Okay. So, uh, probably first place that I hang out the most is Instagram. You can find me at Daniela.Spear. And then second place is on YouTube. Same thing, Daniela Spear on YouTube. And I have some really great long form videos on there, some follow along videos, restorative sessions on there that have been like really helpful to my clients. So if you're kind of looking for a starting place of like, how do I connect in with my body? Check out my YouTube channel. And then also check out my website, remadewellness.com. I actually have a free download called Unlocking Your Body's Secrets, a guide to understanding your emotions and healing chronic symptoms. And it is a guide in helping you reconnect your mind body connection. I also have a guided like body scan and meditation and a ton of questions to help you reflect on your autoimmune experience and what those underlying symptoms could be pointing to on a bigger scale, like for like your emotional history, the needs that your body is asking for. So it's kind of like unlocking the secrets you feel like your body is holding. And I also have a weekly newsletter called the Remade Journal. So I'll also provide Emma that link to share with you all.
Yes, please give me all the links.
Yeah.
Did you mention your Instagram already?
I did.
Oh
It was my
no,
first one. Oh, and I didn't mention my podcast.
your
My
podcast. That's
podcast.
what it was.
Yeah. It is the Remade Life podcast, the Remade Life podcast, and it is on Apple and Spotify. So
You
check it
have
out.
so
I'll
many
send
things.
Emma all the links, all the links.
Yes. Don't worry, y'all. And my mom subscribes to your journal and she loves it.
She does.
She's your big.
She is one of my faithful readers. She always writes back. She is a ray of sunshine. She's a gem. I love
She
her.
loves you. She loves you. I'm wondering if it's more than she loves me.
No, I
It's
mean,
probably pretty high up there.
I'm glad to be part of the fam at this point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, thank you again, friend, for being here. I'll have you back sometime soon.
Yeah,
And
thank
have
you
a good
again.
day.
Thank you for having me.